Hello and welcome again to the 10th Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival. My name's Jonathan Riddle and since 1990 I've called myself a Bendigonian. During the festival's first and opening session, we discussed the role of optimism as a driving force of innovation. Our panel discussed strategies which can help a regional city like Bendigo face an unknown future with optimism, and tools to identify and work with global, national and local issues. Now, before we get underway, I'd like to acknowledge that the Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival is coming to you from Bendigo in Victoria, Australia, and we're on Dja Dja Wurrung land. I'd like to pay respects to the traditional owners who were the first scientists, technologists, and innovators who for thousands of years have been stewards of their culture and land. I'd like to particularly pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. And I'd also like to acknowledge this session's partner, MSD Animal Health, and our contributor, the Australian Space Agency. Remember, we're not just a virtual festival, we're an interactive festival, so you can ask questions via your screen anytime during a presentation. On your screens, you should have an Ask a Question button. Right now, enter your name and where you're joining us from, and we'll do a shout out to you as well as we get underway, whether that's in downtown Bendigo or as far away as Colorado, US, where we had one in our first session. We'd love to hear from you. And use the same box to ask questions right through our presentations. I'll do my best to make sure your voice is heard as part of the 2020 Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival. Now, for those of you who are not too familiar with Bendigo, a quick story. In 1851, two women were cooling off on the banks of Bendigo Creek when they noticed a glitter in the water. Gold. From that small discovery, Bendigo became the second richest goldfield in the world, and for a short time in the 1880s was the richest city in the world. But maybe that gold heritage means that a lot of us spend our time looking down to mining for a prosperous future. And perhaps we should, because our region is starting its own Gold Rush 2.0 as we speak. But maybe we don't spend enough time looking up. And we should be looking up. Our lives are already dominated by space technology, weather forecasting, GPS, agriculture, communications, and a lot of that technology isn't Australian made or owned. So this session, The Sky's the Limit, or is it, has attracted a lot of interest. Join me in welcoming our first speaker, Anthony Murfett, who's the Deputy Head of the Australian Space Agency. Anthony, g'day.
Hey, how are you going?
Really well, thank you. I feel like we're about to start a debate and you are the first speaker for the affirmative. I have a feeling your presentation will absolutely agree the sky's the limit.
Well, I think it will. I think the sky is the limit, but I think at the end of this conversation we'll show the sky only goes so far and we're going to now go beyond the moon to the stars.
All right, we need to put some science into the Australian Space Agency, absolutely. But I hear you have a story to tell us.
I do, and I'm looking forward to telling the story and engaging with those in Bendigo and with the Invention and Innovation Festival and those beyond, and really tell the story of Australia in space and what it means for us going forward.
Take it away.
Thank you. Well, firstly, before I commence, I'd just also like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands where we're all coming together and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Today, it is really exciting to talk to you all about Australia's journey in space and what it means in the future. And what we do want to start with is space has transformed. We started with big Saturn V rockets and going to the moon, but we're now in the 2020s and technology is smaller, it is cheaper, and getting to space is a lot easier. And it means the technologies are no longer big satellites that are the size of buses. They're now down and miniaturized to satellites that can be the size of a loaf of bread, or as seen on your screen, the size of an esky. And this massive transformation is opening up huge opportunities for Australians and businesses because it's becoming heavily commercial in what we can do. And that opportunity that we're seeing around the world, it is forecast to be 1.1 trillion by 2040. At the current state, it is 350 billion in a pre-COVID sense. And excitingly in Australia, our sector is around $4 billion in size. So why are we seeing this growth and why have we seen this traction? It's not only because we've seen this massive transformation of the sector, it's as we were introduced. We use technology every single day. We use it with weather. It supports our firefighters. It helps with GPS and our online banking. But as we look to the future, these technologies, which are cheaper and easy to access, can help farmers monitor their land, again, build on the support for our bushfires. But where we really want to get to and why I'm really excited to talk to you today is the connections it has with Australia's great strengths, whether it's our manufacturing base, whether it's drawing on artificial intelligence and IoT, or using new technologies from quantum technologies, composites, or even new rocket propulsion. Before I go further, I'm going to play a little video to set the scene.
3, 2, since taking that one giant leap, people have benefited from space.
We have a liftoff on Apollo 11.
So how can we continue to use space to improve our connection with the Earth?
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Forecasting climate and weather events, to GPS technology, location tracking and navigation. And secure transactions in real time. Researching, building and testing the technology that helps Australia take the next step. With Aussie companies now part of global supply chains, we can develop the technology that orbits above, as well as build the infrastructure supporting space activities here below. Space technology has made our lives easier and safer. For both this generation and the next. So now that we know what space technology does for us today, what will it do for us tomorrow? The Australian Space Agency, growing and transforming the Australian space industry.
And with that little video, just to outline what our role is right at the end there, it is we are here to grow and transform a globally respected space industry that lifts the broader economy, inspires and improves the lives of Australians, and importantly, underpinned by strong national and international engagement. And I spoke about the value of the sector around the world. We have a sector around $4 billion, and our role is very clear: to triple the size of the economy in a space context to $12 billion and create another 20,000 jobs. And the reason we want to do that is because of that instrumental and important part that space is playing in all our lives. And as we think forward to what Australia can play, the role Australia can play, it is very much around thinking about our role in space, but importantly reflecting about the role it will have here on Earth and helping our farmers, supporting emergency management. To do that, we have a strategy which outlines how we're going to achieve our target of tripling the size of the sector and creating another 20,000 jobs. And we're going to do that through opening doors internationally. And I'll talk through some of our engagement, for example, with NASA. Across the nation, we want to increase capability, and we have programs that are lifting both that are in space, but what we want to do is reach out to those manufacturers and those that haven't thought about space and said, actually, I've got technologies or capabilities that can now be used in space because we've got this transformation. We want to be responsible. We have to ensure that we meet our obligations internationally. And lastly, we want to inspire the nation, and that's how we're truly going to have a future workforce, using space to get the communities, our parents and our kids to understand that Australia really does have a future in space. And how we go about doing this, we have an investment from the Australian government in the order of $700 million since 2017-18, and it's really targeted against this strategy to deliver on our purpose. And we know we have competitive areas of strengths, and we've listed this on the slides. Those areas include drawing on our competitive advantage in the southern location here in the southern hemisphere, where we have a unique view into the sky. We also want to draw on new other areas of the economy, like our mining sector. When NASA, the European Space Agency, turns to Australia and they see that we automate much of our technology in the mining sector, the big trucks, the rail, that level of automation is needed as we go to space, onto the moon and onto Mars. We want to have a role at looking at the sky and understanding what's in orbit so we can be safe. And we want to think about things of the new technologies that are coming forward, such as quantum technologies and AI. And of course, we want to look at things like Earth observations, using images from Earth to help our way of life here on Earth. And as part of that, as we look to invest and grow and transform our space industry, there's a couple of programs that we have in place. We have programs such as our international program, which is designed to open doors internationally so our businesses can connect and contribute to international supply chains. We're investing in infrastructure across the nation so businesses can have the tools that they need to be able to participate in space. We're going to inspire through a space discovery centre, but excitingly, as I'll talk through shortly, we are partnering with NASA on its ambitions to go forward to the moon and onto Mars. It's a $150 million investment about investing in Australian businesses and researchers here, because when we've gone internationally, they look to Australia and they know we've got capabilities, whether it's our land when we're looking up to the sky, it's using that automation technology, or there are companies that might be working with titanium, carbon fibre, or other types of composites, and those type of technologies and composites can be used in space. So to give you a bit of an insight of what we're seeing across the nation and where we're investing, firstly, we're going to invest in a mission control centre in Adelaide, and this will allow companies around the nation to be able to control their satellites and space objects right here in Australia, and it'll be supported through Sabre Astronautics. We're also going to invest in space data and analysis facility, and importantly, this will show how we can use data from space, whether it's images, and show how we can transform other areas of the economy. For example, helping farmers understand what's happening on their land, for example, with moisture content. And importantly, we're investing in things such as robotics and automation. I talked about the fact that we have this amazing technology where we automate much of our activity in the mining sector. The world wants that for their space endeavours, and we're investing in a centre that will show how we can use those capabilities to control space objects right here in Australia. In our international context, we've recently closed a round and we've invested in a range of projects. And some of the exciting projects we've seen include the one on your slide here, Next Generation Spacesuits, where we've got RMIT, Human Aerospace, developing new forms of skin suits that allow and simulate gravity loading so the body believes it's on Earth. And this is really important from a human physiological perspective. We're also having a great collaboration involving a range of companies across Australia to build a CubeSat mission. I talked about satellites earlier. These CubeSats are in the order of the size of a loaf of bread, and they're showing how Australia has great capabilities across the nation and bringing it together under one project, whether it's about controlling it autonomously, communicating in new ways, or creating new forms of propulsion. So that's a really exciting project going forward. And importantly, it's also good to understand what is in orbit around Earth. We want to make sure there's long-term sustainability, and Australia has world-class capabilities in understanding and looking at things in orbit so we can make sure that we continue to have access to space to support our way of life. But where I want to spend a little bit of my time is on our signature initiative called the Moon to Mars Initiative. This was announced by the Prime Minister last year when he went to the US, and this is about Australia partnering with NASA on its ambitions to go forward to the moon and onto Mars, and is focused on engaging with our businesses so they can contribute to international supply chains and show how Australian businesses and researchers and their technologies can support NASA on its ambition. And importantly, as we embark on this journey, it is about inspiring the nation. We want to show the nation that it's no longer just Saturn V rockets. There are capabilities that school kids today can now contribute and look forward to building in the future, whether it is those small CubeSats or it's new devices or new forms of carbon fibre that can be used in space. Australia has the opportunity to bring its know-how and its ingenuity into space. So how are we going to go about doing that? The first part is our supply chain program. Our supply chain program was announced last week, and this is about showing there are Australian businesses around the nation that can contribute. What we want to do is either support businesses so they can get the capabilities they need to support NASA on its ambitions or their supply chains, or for businesses that are thinking about, can I contribute to space, and is this an opportunity for me to show how that capability can be used in space? And so, for example, I use the titanium example. There could be companies manufacturing using titanium in one area of the economy, for example, shipbuilding, which could be used in space. We also want to support and show through another element of our program, the demonstrator. This is about investing in smaller projects that show the world how Australia can contribute to space. Areas would include our robotics and automation and showing how Australian technology can support activities in space. Or it could be using advanced communications. We currently use radio waves to communicate with space. We're now thinking about optical communication, which is faster. And if we get these technologies right, the great thing is not only do they support activities in space, they can help our way of life here on Earth by improving communications. And the last bit that I wanted to touch on is really our Trailblazer piece. The exciting thing about a Trailblazer is that this is the inspirational part where we want to show the nation and show the world where Australia can contribute to NASA's ambitions. This can include a range of different areas. For example, building on our demonstrator program with our robotics and our automation, what we could be doing is showing how we can invest in these technologies to support NASA's activities. Or it could be new ways of communicating, or it could be about digitally mapping what the moon surface looks like so astronauts on the surface understand where they are and what they need to do. So turning to what are the types of industry sectors that can participate, I've touched on some of these particular areas. We've got areas such as manufacturing. Are there other areas of the manufacturing sector that can contribute? I've talked about the composite materials. There are fabricators. We're reaching out to say space has transformed and this is an opportunity. The sky is the limit. It is now, space is more accessible. Think about whether you've got something that can contribute. I've spoken about our resources sector. We've got great capabilities. When NASA's administrator talks about international collaboration in their Moon to Mars activities, and particularly the Artemis program, they talk about Australia. They look to Australia because they know we have these technologies that they can draw on, whether it's our resources base. They know we can be trusted because we've got a great defence relationship. And it's really exciting to see the head of NASA turning to Australia and saying, you know what, you Aussies, you can do this. And we have a program here that can really provide the springboard for us to be successful. And an exciting area we're also seeing is in the area of space medicine. Australia is world-class in its medical capabilities. And as I come back to my theme that this space sector has really transformed, we're an area where it's heavily commercial, it's really exciting, but importantly, the ability to get to space is a lot easier. So we can leverage capabilities in our medical sector, for example, to support astronauts as they go forward to the moon and onto Mars. As I say, going back to the sky's the limit. Well, we're going to go beyond the sky. We're going to go to the moon. We're going to go onto the stars. And I think we've got a platform here to support that. So in closing, I'll leave you with an exciting future awaits, and we want to continue to inspire the nation. What I wanted to show through this presentation is that Australia does have a range of capabilities. On my first couple of slides, I've spoken about space transforming. It is now accessible. We know we use it every day, and it helps other areas of the economy. And it touches on various areas such as a strong manufacturing base, supporting the future of jobs. And as we look to the future, and not only are we looking to invest in space to support space activities, we want to ensure those space activities also have a return here on Earth. Improving space medicine will improve rural medicine capabilities here in Australia. Lifting communication with space will improve communication here on Earth. And automation is going to continue to be a really important part, whether it's on space or here on Earth. And I think that's a tremendous opportunity. And I think that is why, as we look to the future, and I know as we're all grappling with COVID-19 and the pandemic and what does it mean, space will play an important part of Australia's future. The world is looking at us. They're looking at us because there are people and companies and capabilities that they know Australia can contribute. And it's great to be on this journey. It's great to talk to you. And I'm really looking forward to any of the questions that come forward so we can really say, is the sky the limit, or do we need to come up with a new phrase? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Anthony Murfett is from the Australian Space Agency. We've decided the sky's the limit is just not high enough. Let's say Mars is the limit at this stage. Anthony, we do have some questions coming through, and people are using the question box on the side of their screen to submit them. But I'll actually just start questions with a comment from Victor Purton from the Centre of Optimism, who just says, inspire the nation, wonderful. 20,000 jobs in tripling the industry. Realistic optimism, optimistic strategy, strong purpose, action, engagement, and partnerships. What a great opportunity for Bendigo. Thanks for enthusiasm and optimism, Victor. I've got this question from Paula, though, I think, Anthony, which is quite interesting, and that is, do you think that our universities have the right courses for the next generation so they really can contribute to the future of this space program?
Yeah, thank you for the question. What we've seen, and this is what's been really exciting over the last couple of years, we were established 2 years ago and we were coming off a low base. But with putting out the strategy, we said we've got this vision to say we've got to create 20,000 jobs. The government has been clear that this is a priority for them. We've got a strong manufacturing base, and we're seeing the university sector respond. It's been amazing over the last couple of years how there are now courses custom to support space engineering. And recently, as the weekend, new opportunities for PhD and master students are evolving every day. And I think there's more we can always do. And that's not just for space. I think the future workforce piece is really, really important. It's for manufacturing, it's for AI, it's for a range of different areas. And I think if what we can do, if we can use the lens of space to inspire people to think about STEM education and give a strong strategy to incentivise universities to shape that opportunity, I think we'll be on the right path. And I always like to say it's great working in space because it inspires. I talk about space and dinosaurs. They're the two things that get kids excited. We've got space, and that's what we're going to continue to do to show this is real and it's tangible.
I suppose that to reverse the conversation, back in the 70s, NASA created some amazing technologies, Velcro, insulations, Teflon. But the other way around is Australians as innovators and inventors might actually be developing things we had no idea had a space application but will.
That's correct. And I think one of the big areas we do want to investigate with the Australian community is when people often think about space, they don't realise it's now more accessible, and there's activities they're working on which can translate across. I spoke about one of the examples around carbon fibre, and what was interesting, they had a new layering technique which reduced the amount of air that was in there, and they were using it for a land-based activity, but because they've reduced the amount of air, and when it goes to space in a vacuum, that's really important. So again, this translation that space is now accessible is a real important point that we want to draw on.
Excellent. April's thrown a question or a comment in that can be turned into a question. Consider looking to private companies in the US like SpaceX that are moving faster in terms of space exploration. Is your contract or association with NASA precluding you from getting involved with some of the private firms?
So one of the big things we're doing with NASA, it's really focusing on engagement with their supply chain. So the agencies work together to think about what missions could be. But the reason we're partnering is actually the commercial opportunity. We want our businesses to connect in with SpaceX, with the Lockheeds, the Northrops, the Boeings, because that's where the opportunity is. And the reason we want to do that is it helps diversify our companies here, that they might be working in defence or one sector and they can transfer over to another. But yes, we're very much commercially focused, and I think we're probably the most industry-focused agency in the world.
It's interesting, Bendigo quite recently was announced as a international centre for gastronomy. Our food is second to none in some ways, but Paul wants to know whether or not there are opportunities in the agri-food sector and nutrition, and whether or not a regional centre that knows their food could have a role to play.
Well, absolutely. No, this is why space is exciting, and we're talking about that translation from one area to the other. Astronauts need to eat when they're on the surface or when they're travelling in space. But as we look to go forward to the moon, we want a sustainable presence. So the agri-food area is absolutely one. And Australia's got an advantage because we learn to grow food with low water needs. And as you go to the moon, they've only discovered water on the moon in the late 2000s. There's not a lot of it there. So Australia has an opportunity to think through how it can adapt its agri-food technologies and what it means for space.
Well, Simon's continued that conversation about working with different agencies. Do you think that in our conversations with NASA and other agencies, we could actually see Australia as a Southern Hemisphere launch site?
So what we've seen in our civil space strategy, we identified access to space, which includes the launch piece, as an opportunity for Australia. So we are seeing that here, whether it's in South Australia in a polar orbit or in the Northern Territory with an equatorial orbit. What we're focusing in the agency is the regulatory environment to ensure it's safe, but we're seeing these commercial opportunities unfold. New Zealand has rocket labs, so I think, again, space has become a commercial opportunity for everyone, and it's about investigating what that market means. But yes, we are seeing some of that growth in the industry.
Okay. You began by being very clever with science and saying the sky is not the limit for space. We can go way beyond the sky. But while you were talking, I did the maths. You're saying we're investing $700 million for hopefully a $12 billion return by, was it 2030 or 2040? My math says that for every $7 invested, we're hoping for 120 back. Do you think that that is actually realistic?
So always good to have a level of ambition, but I think, yes, it is. As we go forward, we've got a strong target. And I think it comes back to the fact that it's not just about government investment anymore. This is a partnership. The agency is a partner and facilitator how it undertakes its role. And we know there is strong industry investment. We've already identified a $2 billion investment pipeline into Australia over the last couple of years. So I think we're trending quite well. And the sector's growing at around 7 to 8% pre-COVID. So I think we're on the right track to get that return.
Excellent. And can I finish with a crystal ball question, if you don't mind, Anthony? And that is that what do you think is the next piece of space tech that will make the jump into our everyday life, like a GPS or a Velcro?
So what is the next? Well, I think one of the big technologies that are going to be there is if we get optical communications, this is really going to transform. It is faster. It is more secure. So I think if we nail optical communication, that's going to be transforming for our way of communicating here on life.
Excellent. And I wish that I had another 3 minutes or more. This is a big question. And can you take it on notice, and maybe we can continue the conversation on the internet rather than here? Joe says NASA has released its 10 principles for the exploitation of the moon. I personally have a problem with the word exploitation. The Artemis Accords, they suggest norms of behaviour with the US notionally leading it. Joe says, I have 3 concerns, no room to explain. Do we have concerns around the principles? So is there a place where we talk to that particular set of guidelines in the Australian Space Agency ether?
It's a really important question. I think we're signatory to 5 international space treaties, which includes the Moon Treaty. So anything that we do is guided by and aligning with our obligations and those international obligations. So that's a very important part as we go forward. And it's why we've got the word responsible in our purpose. It is very important we have the long-term sustainability. But that's a longer question to answer. But again, 5 international space treaties, and we'll be consistent with our international obligations as we go forward.
Excellent. I'll be looking forward to looking up more of that on your webpage, the Australian Space Agency. Anthony, I don't often use the word inspirational at the end of a presentation, but thank you so much for the inspiring presentation.
Thank you very much for your time.
Anthony is from the Australian Space Agency, and good luck with the journey to the sky and beyond. And thank you, of course, for your time on the 2020 Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival. Well, if you are inspired by this session, share your thoughts on Twitter and other social media platforms with the hashtag 2020BIIF. That's 2020BIIF. And don't forget to log on to some of the other sessions that we have throughout the festival. Coming up tomorrow, for example, we are looking at the future of manufacturing, also Bendigo's new gold rush, and an immigrant's journey leading to innovation. Use the 2020 BIIF app on your browser or mobile phone to add more free sessions. Well, from the sky's the limit in a absolutely literal way with Anthony, let's move on to meet Peter Riddles. Dr. Riddles has also made a lifelong commitment to science and its use in generating economic and social benefit, notably with biotechnology and innovation more widely. I hope you'll forgive me, but I don't think Peter will actually ever retire. He's currently active on the boards of Hear and Say Centre for Deaf Children and also Australia's lead scientific organisation, the CSIRO, and is a Fellow of the Royal Society for the Arts, Manufacture and Commerce. Dr. Peter Riddles, welcome to the BIIF. How are you? So anyway, and also welcome to Sophia Richmond and Mario Panisi. I'm going to hand this session right over to you, Peter, if that's okay. Mario will be my mouthpiece for asking any questions from the audience. But in the meantime, this word innovation and Bendigo, can you put the two together for me?
Innovation and Bendigo. Well, I have to make a confession. I was coerced into coming to this festival by a great colleague of ours, the esteemed and most optimistic Victor Burton. And I believe because of the conversations we've had with him over many years, the linkage is there between optimism and innovation. You can't be an innovator unless you believe in the future, unless you have confidence that there will be good outcomes of your innovation journey. That's why you have to be optimistic. That's why we are all optimistic. I believe that's why we're here at the Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival.
So, Peter, just Victor, yes, it is thanks to Victor that we're all on this call. So, how is optimism and innovation, how are they linked together? Why is it important that we have optimism?
Actually, there's some interesting work has been done on this. It's actually a topic of research for some academics. And one of the stories I like best about this is that one of the previous premiers of China asked the Chinese Academy of Science, why is it that the Western world seems to do innovation so well and seem to be able to underpin their economic and social and democratic processes so well? So the Chinese Academy of Science beavered away and did the study and the analysis, and they came up with some perhaps not unexpected conclusions that one of the reasons why their societies and the economies are so strong was due to innovation. And not just technical innovation, but innovation in their governance structures, their economies, their law systems, and so on. And the Premier said, well, how do we get to be innovative? And the scientists went through a long explanation. But the bottom line was that there had to be a degree or a high degree of faith. You can swap that word faith for optimism, if you like, because unless you actually believe in the future, unless entrepreneurs and innovators have a framework where they can see some sort of destiny which goes beyond today, you're probably not going to innovate, or you're less likely to innovate. So fundamentally, I agree with Victor and others that optimism is really essential to successful innovation.
Thank you for that. I've noticed Victor's actually sent a message through, so I actually might just quickly jump to that. He attributes this to you, Peter. Optimism and innovation are virtually connected, each becoming the motivation for the other. Do you remember saying that to Victor, or
I do.
wherever you said that?
Well, yeah, Victor's good at coercion, and he has extracted quite a few sayings out of me like that. But if you think about it, well, I've already sort of made the case that optimism is required for innovation. But if you're successful in innovation, it in turn, all those good things that come out of innovation, it in turn creates an optimistic framework. So it's a virtual cycle of optimism, innovation. That's the reason why. Yeah.
Okay, probably worthwhile. Just give us your definition of what is innovation. We've bandied it around. It's in the title of this conference. Where did it come from? What does it mean? What does it mean to you?
The word innovation has actually been around for a very long time, and I won't go into the details of that unless you wish. In the modern paradigm, which is really the last 100 years, innovation is used in an economic, social development sense. And I think Peter Drucker, who was a great studier of innovation and entrepreneurship, he made the definition that innovation is the specific instrument of the entrepreneur. It's actually a tool that endows existing resources with new value, new wealth. And to me, there are three key words in that definition. One, the word tool or process, the word new, and the word useful. And all three have to hold for it to be innovation. So just to make the point, if it's not new or it's not useful, it can't be called innovation. And I'll expand on that because that's the only restriction on the use of the word innovation. There's a guy called Joseph Schumpeter who in the 1930s made a detailed study of the different types of innovation. And this is important because in the context of looking at regional development and national development. And those 5 categories of innovation, if you like, are the introduction of a new product or service, the introduction of a new way of making something, a new way of manufacturing, the introduction of new inputs into a manufacturing or process or a service, the introduction of a new market, a new way of selling things, and finally, the one which I'm most intrigued by, it's actually innovation in governance, new ways of having your organisation or system being structured. So all those things create new things and new opportunities and new value, and they are all innovation. And I should say that not all companies, not all nations, not all regions, not all towns like Bendigo are likely to be really good at all of those. And we can explore that later if you wish to. Thanks, Mario.
Okay, I'll just before I throw to Sophia, I'd like to encourage the audience to make use of the online question opportunities, and we will do our best to ventilate any issues that they raise. Over to you, Sophia.
Peter, perhaps we can speak of Australia's innovation system. A couple of questions on that. Is it unique in the world? And if so, what characterises it? And perhaps you might also speak of something you often do, of innovation versus invention. Where do we stand in Australia and the region? So a few Australian-based questions there.
Very good. Thanks, Sophia. I'll deal with the invention versus innovation one first, because it actually helps to answer the first question. So essentially, innovation is about an idea. And if the idea is worth it, you probably all know that you can go ahead and patent that idea. You don't have to take it to market or prove that it's useful. It's just a good idea and it's unique, original, and it's patentable or protected in some other ways. Innovation is actually showing that it's useful. Both have the idea of novelty in them, invention and innovation. But the differentiating factor with innovation is it's useful, and you know it's useful because it's being used, purchased, bought, utilised, redeployed. And the CEO of CSIRO, Larry Marshall, would often make the point, and I think this is very relevant to Australia's system, and if you don't mind, I'll just reach for my cell phone to make the point. Probably most of you are aware that the algorithms inside the phone to deal with wireless technology is an invention by CSIRO. Not all of the iPhone is an invention by CSIRO, but the algorithms inside it that enable the Wi-Fi is an invention of CSIRO. But we didn't innovate that in Australia. other companies around the world that make cell phones did the innovation, and they combined all sorts of technologies and innovations to come up with this mobile device. And we know it's useful because just about everyone on the earth has at least one of these. So it proves that it establishes the definition of innovation, new and useful. But the invention, we think we're pretty good at invention in Australia. It's that innovation piece where we can adopt its usefulness and get the economic and social potential that we may not be so good at. So your first question is what makes Australia different? And this is the way I look at it. You don't have to agree with me, but it's the way I look at it. Australia, since for most of its economic development, has been largely a commodities and or services-oriented economy. Now, innovation works best in those sorts of economies if the innovation is directed at the cost end, saving costs, helping with, as I detailed in Schumpeter's categories of innovation, it helps with the inputs into the innovation system, the commodities. So if we can discover minerals better or dig them out of the ground better or transport them better, we can compete better on the global commodities market. We're not so good at the value-adding part of it, the new products and services. We want to be, and we just heard a great story of the space industry driving the sort of value-added manufacturing part of our economy. That's one of the differences. We're a commodity-based economy, hoping to diversify to include value-added manufacturing. And I think it's really important that if you're going to have innovation policy and programs, to recognise the differences and where you might want to redeploy your resources to do so. Thanks, Sophia.
Thanks, Peter. I'm just looking at the screen. We've got a couple of questions here. I might just jump in. Paul asks, Peter, can you please give us your thoughts of the link between entrepreneurial innovation and the positive approach to failure?
Right. The common link between these two is quite nuanced. So I'll just sort of explain what innovation was, and that in fact, as Peter Drucker said, it's a tool that entrepreneurs use. Right. Entrepreneurs are often the ones that do the innovation because they are actually quite optimistic, as we sort of alluded to. But the positive approach to failure means it doesn't mean you lose your optimism. It means you're ready to move on to the next opportunity. And in order to move on the next opportunity, you recognize the failure quickly, get rid of that, because if you spend time on something that's going to be a failure, more and more resource, more and more opportunity for the new value is lost if you don't give up on the failure. Thank you for the question.
Okay, and just there is, they haven't identified themselves, they've just anon. Do you think people are more innovative during challenging times like the current pandemic? And the asker goes on to say, Churchill once said, never let a good crisis go to waste. Is that true?
I think Churchill said that for good reason, because obviously he found himself in a leadership position during a significant crisis called World War II. But let me go back to the first part of the question, and then I'll finish up with some comments. I consider that innovation is driven by a purpose. That has to be there, because to be useful, you've got to have a purpose. But to actually get to the end game, because the benefits of innovation are in the future. They're from the time you start doing the innovation, you don't realise the benefit until after some effort, resources, money, skills, time, even a number of risks, as you know. So you have to be highly motivated. You have to have what I call necessity hanging over the person or the organisation or the region or town who are driving that innovation. And I often refer back to Plato, who is purported to have said, and it is necessity who art the mother of invention. So using invention, innovation interchangeably there. So I think it is a really important driver of innovation. And what we've seen with COVID-19 is not innovation at an individual level or an entrepreneurial level necessarily, but it's brought the country together in some ways. That necessity has driven the speed of innovation, the rapid redeployment of tests and rapid development of pharmaceuticals and vaccines, that big necessity, which everyone can feel, is driving those innovation processes. So the crisis of World War II, as Churchill said, drove a lot of innovations from cracking the code to armaments to systems, radar, all sorts of things were driven by that crisis. We're in the same situation now.
Peter, we know you've always been at the forefront of the science and innovation junction. Again, I have two questions about that. Firstly, what's the relationship between science and innovation? And I'll go to my second after that.
Okay, that's good. So, Sophia, thank you. I was often challenged by the intersection between science and innovation. So part of the answer lies in the fact that Peter Drucker identified that one of the hardest processes of innovation to do is where it's technically or scientifically based, because there are a lot more risks. The science might fail. There are regulations often in these industries. All these risks make it harder to produce a product. As you know, drugs and vaccines take an inordinately long time to get to market. But when I was in Canada, I did quite a bit of work in Canada on their innovation systems. And two leading authorities in that country did a desktop analysis of Canada's economy, its productivity, and over 30 or so reports on the innovation and science system. And they made a really simple conclusion, which is, in a way, self-evident, but it's worth restating. And Canada is a bit like Australia. They're really good on a per capita basis on science. They're in the leading journals. There's a lot of impact, high-quality science, highly recognised by the scientific community. But when you look at the innovation index, right, and productivity measures, it was low, a bit like Australia. We tend to be 20 to 30 levels down these innovation ladders. But the simple conclusion was, after this analysis, was that because you're good at science doesn't mean you're good at innovation. That kind of makes sense intuitively, but often we lumber these two things together and maybe muddle them up a bit. And I think that leads to a bit of confusion around the way we do our policy in this place. It's very important to understand that the link between science and innovation isn't necessarily a given, although many countries and companies are really good at it. They specialise in that linkage. Thanks, Sophia.
All right, getting practical now. We look at your LinkedIn background. There's all this huge innovation and science background. For many of us today, that's a totally different skill set to ours. Let's say I'm in a Bendigo workplace. It's dawned on me I've innovated something world-class. I know it's useful. I've got the technical know-how, but I like your skill sets in how to ignite and scale it to a global level. Given your lifetime of expertise in that sphere, how do you approach advising me?
Right. Well, my first advice is to get good advice, because in all your efforts and need to take that to a global market, there are a whole bunch of areas of expertise you need to be not maybe familiar with, but you don't necessarily have the expertise in. Everything from legal, patenting, commercialization, regulation, prototype building, testing, understanding your market, and all that kind of stuff is done by experts in that particular domain. The entrepreneur, like you, will need to bring all those together, and that's your primary activity as, if you like, an entrepreneur, an innovator. And you've got to check that this works with that, right? You've got to find where the best place is to go get that advice. So get some good advice to get that advice. Thanks, Sophia.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sophia. Thanks, Peter. So we've got a few questions. So before I jump onto those, I will again encourage our audience to keep asking questions. Thank you for those. Peter, before I jump to the question, I was reading a report that was done as an economic development survey for regions in Australia, and it covered. It was an Australia-wide survey. And the top three challenges that were identified by this particular piece of work, it's an unpublished report, but I think probably consistent with others that you and I probably have seen in other places, that funding and enabling projects was a key challenge that regions face. So access to funding. skills shortage was a challenge that regions face, having the right labour and people available to do the things that somebody might aspire to. And the other one, which is, you've sort of touched on it, a lack of infrastructure. So enabling infrastructure, and specifically transport, was identified in this survey. I don't want you to comment on that just at the moment, but I would like to think about those things. And I'll pick up one of the questions. And again, from somebody called Anon, this person has said, can you comment on regions and innovation and their place within the national economy? You've kind of touched on it, but might want to just cut it a different way.
Well, that's why we're here. So it's a great question. We're here because we're contemplating the innovation paradigm for regions like Bendigo. And I read that report, or at least some of it, Mario, that you referred to. And there are lots of regions, all different types around Australia, that would and do benefit from innovation. So I believe that given that much of our population, not all, is not on the coast, they're in the regions, in the big rural towns like Bendigo, and I think that's 110,000 people. They've got quite diverse economies. And it's no different for a region than it is to a national or a state economy. The region needs to have a stable, sustainable, environment-friendly, enduring economy so its citizens can participate in the economy and have a quality of life. And the same principles apply. You know, I'm going to partly answer your first question to give context. Is I've worked for a number of regions around the world, in Canada and in the UK. And the thing that I noticed in the regions that seem to work, so this is very qualitative, by the way, is there's a whole of community support for some vision or aspiration for that region. And the community is involved in the governance. It's not, you know, some individual on the side. The community are front and centre in the governance of their community, and they help make the decisions, and they own, as I said, they own, you know, the necessity for the innovation in their community. And I think that's really important. And the second thing is to be competitive, because that's what innovation is largely about from an economic point of view. You've got to have leading infrastructure. You alluded that in your first question, Mario. If you don't have the leading infrastructure, the investors won't come, the innovators will find it more difficult, you won't compete. So it's tricky for regions because the infrastructure will be quite local. But we know, as you know, there are quite a few examples of cities like Bendigo making an investment. It might be an airport, it might be a new road, it might be a high-speed train, it might be a technology park where, you know, entrepreneurs can find a home. All these things make a difference. And even fundamental things like having good services, you know, internet services, electrical, water supply, they make the difference. They remove a barrier to innovation and growth. So I hope that goes some way to answering those two thoughts and questions. Thanks.
Yep, thank you. Sophia, I've got a couple more on screen. Are you happy for me to jump, or do you want to go in?
I've got one last one. Yeah,
go
Peter,
on, go.
We look at you and we see this father of innovation who just keeps getting on with it. What we don't see is what you feel underneath all of your achievements. If you were to speak of things that nobody normally bothers to ask, perhaps 2 or 3 parts of your science and innovation life, of your pain, your joy, your feeling of conquering, how would you describe them?
Describing my feelings about what has been done, is that?
Of your science and innovation life and journey, your pains, your joys, your feeling of conquering.
I don't quite understand why I ended up on this journey, probably like a lot. But I'm going to share some more personal insights to you. So, and this is important, I think, to the bigger question. So I was scientific before I went to school. I remember that because age 3 and 4, I was messing around with microscopes and chemistry sets and things probably my parents would rather I wasn't doing. But I had great support from my parents and my extended family. In fact, I often say I got most of my education at home, and the formal education at school was the supplementary piece. And those two together, we are faced in our country with challenge with STEM, making sure we get enough students through science and technology and engineering maths, and we seem to be falling down the ladder. I think one of the successes of education would be if we can make it a shared responsibility across communities and families, as well as the formal parts. With regard to sort of the aspirational pieces, I guess I've just matched what I thought I could do, science and then later innovation, into trying to be of some value, because in a way innovation is part of my values, which is to deliver benefit, to deliver good things, largely through a scientific process that people can find useful. Because if we stop doing that, we'll probably fall back to a place where we don't want to be, which is sort of anti-civilization, and we would struggle with the world where it's going right now. So innovation is absolutely fundamental to good societies, good economies, good health, good environment. All those things we talk about, we need it as a tool. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. Thanks, Sophia. We've got just under a minute, Peter. And I guess I'd like you to bring it home. What would Bendigo need to do to become a centre of excellence in innovation? I'm sorry, you don't have a long time to answer it. You've only got about 30 seconds, so go your hardest.
Right, I'll give the elevator pitch. One, I would encourage Bendigo to work out where they want to be. You can be all sorts of industries and communities, but you should look at your own innate potential, where things are working well, and say, we want to build that and take it to the next stage. The other thing is, if you're not already doing it, I'd have a Bendigo innovation body where the citizens, the community leaders, industry leaders work together, defining and taking that innovation journey forward. Those two things are fundamental to actually putting innovation to work.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Sophia. We're at time. We're at time. So, Jonathan, I think it's my duty to throw back to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mario. Thank you, Sophia, and Dr. Peter Riddles. Thank you too for talking about some of the big picture innovation and drilling it down into Bendigo as well. Thank you so much too for joining us for our conversation, The Sky's the Limit, or is it? And I think we've concluded that the sky's just not high enough. There's plenty more space to go upwards. We've been at the 2020 Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival. In 2 hours from now, another important conversation about innovation through optimism, this time the importance of creativity and communication in science. Details are on the webpage and app, BIIF.com.au. So thank you very much for joining us from the 2020 Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival.